Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 2 of Let's Learn C++. Nick here, and today we're going to be picking up where we left off in the last video. You can see that I've already got the Let's Learn C++ tutorial open, and I've got it at the exact same point where we left off. So with that said, I'm going to just jump right in and start getting into some of the other stuff associated with C++. Now, in the last video, we talked about how this is the entry point and how we've got the header file and the source file, which is the main.cpp is the source and the main.h is the header. And now I'm going to show you guys the importance of the two and a little bit of how they work. So, like I said before, this ~include main.h will include everything from this main.h file right here when we go to run the file. So let's just do a quick little thing here. We're going to type we're going to create, let's say, an integer, and we're going to name it int number, because it really doesn't matter what we call it, and we're going to assign this a value of 0. So we have declared an integer, and right now I'm declaring it here outside of our function, and I'm going to use it in the function. You could put it in here too, but I'll show you why I did this in a second. And we are going to say cout, and we're going to, and we're going to put int number. And with Visual Studio, the auto sense for C++ doesn't work the greatest. So if you start typing something and you know it's close to that, you can hold Control and hit space, and it'll fill it in for you. So it'll make it a little bit quicker for you. It comes in handy a little bit later on. But what I've done here is cin is the C++ input, and cout is like the C++ output. And basically what I'm doing is I'm telling it to output int number, which is that variable we declared. And then endl just stands for end line, so it's like a line break. So it'll end that line there. Now, if you can't follow along to this point, you probably are going to have problems going forward, but I'll try to explain this a little bit more. Basically, this is a variable, and it's something that we declared as an integer, so we're telling it that we created this little variable here, which is basically a container that's going to hold a certain value, and we're telling it that that value, the type, is going to be an integer. So int number is the variable, like the container name, and it's going to contain an integer, and then we're setting that integer equal to 0. So if I run this code right now, it's going to output the number 0, and it's going to end the line. So if I run, and the shortcut for run, if you don't feel like clicking debug up here every time, is F5. And that's usually the default. And it's going to build it, and now you can see that we've got our 0, and our cursor is on the line below it. So we can type as usual, delete stuff, and then we can hit enter and it closes out. So that works perfectly. Now, let's say we want to put this number, we don't want it declared here, we want it declared somewhere else. So let's go into our main.h. If we cut it and paste it here, you'll notice that, well actually first, let me cut it, and you'll notice that now it says int number is undefined, so it has no idea what it is. And if we put it in the main.h file, it now knows what it is, because it's including everything from the main.h file here. So it's basically saying, it's declaring it here, but then it actually gets put here. So now when we run it, it will get output there. So you can see it's 0. So even though it's not even in this file, there's no int number anywhere else in here. It's because it's in this header file here. Now, depending on how you want to do your applications, this may or may not be a good idea. And what I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to put it back in here. And if you notice, I've got it now, it's in the header file and it's in the source file. So if I run this, it's going to give us an error. It's saying redefinition. Basically, we have two variables with the same exact name. Now, you can't do that, obviously, because it wouldn't know which one to work with. So what you have to do is make sure that every variable you use has a unique name to it. So the reason it's doing that obviously is because we have it in the two spots there, and it's going to be public. So anything else that includes this main.h file is going to also include this here, so it's going to create a lot of issues for us. Now let's say we wanted to share this int number with another function that we'll get into later. What we would do is, instead of assigning it a value, we would just declare it, say that there's going to be a container named int number, and it's going to have an int type, and before this we're going to put extern. So basically it's saying that extern means externally to this file there is some piece of code that's going to declare this variable as an integer. And I'll show you a little bit how this works later on, but if you're having trouble following, it'll become clear soon. So back here, so we've got just our main.cpp, and we've got it outputting the number. So now let's try to change that number. So after we output the number the first time, it's going to output as 0, because that's what it defaults to. And then we're going to say int number plus equals 1. So we are going to add 1 to it. And then if we copy this same line and paste it here, we're going to see out the same number. So it's going to output the value of the int number, and then we're going to add 1 to it, and then we're going to output it again. So let's run this. And you can see it says 0, and then it says 1. So that's pretty simple. Basically, you're telling it to, it starts off as 0, and then you're adding 1, and then it's obviously going to become 1. So, I mean, that's that simple to add a number to that. And you could do the same thing. You could add 10 to it, and if you run this, then it's going to say 0, 10, because it's going to add 10. And that's how you change your integers or your variables. Now, let's say we wanted to add two numbers together. So you could say int number equals, let's say 1 plus 2. It is going to output 3. And that's fine. But let's say we had some crazy calculation where we had, let's create two more variables. And we're going to call this int a, and this is going to equal to some random number, and then we're going to say int b, and this is going to be equal to another random number, and then we want int number to be equal to, let's just go with something crazy. So we're going to say a over 8 minus b squared times b minus a. And then we'll just do divided by 5. So now we've got this crazy function here. And if we run it, bam, negative 3,439. So that's kind of cool. And I guess that works, but let's say we have to do this multiple times over and over and over and over again, and we have to change a few things, or we have to use different variables to input this. So let's say we now have these variables here. So we have, let's go and redeclare two new ones. We're going to put int c and int d, and we'll just put this to that, and we'll just do this like there. And then let's say we want to copy this back up here, or else it will never output it. And let's say we want to put this in here, but now we have to go and say, okay, the A's become C's, and then the B's become D's. So now you have to go through here and then change all that so we can run it and it'll work. But you can see now it's kind of a pain to go through and update that. Let's say we have to do it again with variables. Let's just go big, and let's just go E and F. Yeah, there we go. E, F. And then we have to change C's to E's, and then D's to F's. And you can see this kind of takes a long time, and it really looks confusing. You've got all this stuff here, and it kind of looks like a mess. So, I mean, it works, and you can see, and actually that's the same because we didn't change our values here. Shame on us. There we go. Okay, so you can see it works, but this is a lot of code. It would be really nice if we could just take these two numbers and pass it to something and have it do all this stuff for us without having to declare these integers and then have to change these little calculations here to do that. So with that said, why don't we do just that? And the way we do that is we're going to create a function. So we're going to call it int because that's the type that we're working with. And we're going to call it calculate value or something. There we go. So calculate value. So just like int main, it has an integer type and it's going to return a integer type. We want our int calculate value to return an integer type as well. So we're going to type int, and it's going to be called int return. And we'll just default it to 0. So we're going to say that this function is going to return whatever the value of int return becomes set to. So we're going to declare the value here, and then we're going to do our calculations, and then we're going to return it. So basically, we have our function here, but in order for it to run the calculation, we actually have to have it do something with it. So we're going to say int return equals c over 8 and this whole calculation that we came up with randomly. But you're noticing now that these aren't declared, because when you declare values or variables inside of a function, they can only be used within that function. Now we really don't care too much about these values because these could constantly change and we don't want to ever link right to these. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this to int a, and this to int a, and d is going to be called int b, and this is going to be called int b. So we've now got int a and int b. Now those aren't declared because we haven't declared them yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it that this calculate value function is going to expect two parameters. We're going to say that it's going to have an integer passed to it called int a, and it's going to have a second integer passed to it called int b. So now we have this function here saying that it is called calculate value, it's going to return an integer, and it needs you to pass two integers to it in order for it to return that value correctly. So with that said, we can now get rid of this crazy calculation here, and we can just say int number equals calculate value, and if we do this, you're going to notice that it's saying over here there's too few arguments. Basically, you're trying to call this function, and it's saying, well, you're not passing me int a and int b. So what we could either do is we could plug in e here, and then f here, and it would now work. So it's basically saying pass e, and then pass f, the values of it, and then do your calculations, and then return the integer, and then set it equal to, or set int number equal to whatever return value this function gives us. Another way you could do it, if these aren't ever going to be changed or used anywhere, you could just manually put the values right in here, the actual numbers, and now it will do the exact same thing. So if we do this, we can apply the same thing to here, and we're going to paste it here as well, and we're going to make sure to copy the correct values, so a, and then b goes here, and if we copy this, paste, and now from all those lines of code that we just had, we now have little simple sets. So we can just kind of even group them together a little bit too. And what you guys can see me doing is I'm keeping all my code organized. C++, I mean, technically I could put this one all the way out here. I could put a ton of line breaks in between here. But as you're going to read through this, it's going to make it very difficult. So when I code, I try to keep similar objects together. So you can see that int number and then cout int number, those two are grouped because it's saying I'm changing this int number and then I'm going to output it. And this one changes it and outputs it. This one changes it and outputs it. So it's in these little groups and stuff. So it's a lot easier to work with. So now if we took this and ran it, then you're going to see that now we have an issue. It's going to say calculate value identifier not found. Now, the weird thing is, you can see it's right here. What is it talking about? Calculate value is right here. So why is it not able to find this? This makes no sense. Well, the way C++ works is as it's running through its code, it only knows about things that have been declared before the line here. So since this is down here below it, it doesn't know it exists. So there's two different ways we can do this. There's a more correct way, and then there's the rigged way. So the rigged way would be to cut it and paste it above the int main, and then if you run it, you'll notice that now it works. So we've got our values out there, and that there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it works. Obviously, it's not incorrect because it is working, but there is a better way to do it, because you can't always have to reorder everything in your code, because it could get messy and lead you to problems later. So I'm going to undo this. I'm going to put it back below there. And what I'm going to do now is copy just this part here that actually declares the function. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go into main.h. So actually, I'll show you this whole thing. So if I copy this function here, I'm going to cut it out completely just to show you guys what happens. I could cut the whole function out, and I could put this function in main.h, and it will include it up here, and it will be included before main, so now we can run it and it works. And again, this works, but this is not how C++ is supposed to be. The header files are supposed to be just for declaring what your code is going to do, and then actually your code, when it does its work, is supposed to happen in the C++ file. So I'm going to undelete it here. So you can see now that int calculate value is back in our main. So this is the actual function. And in our header file, instead of having the whole function, I'm going to delete from the little curly brackets. I'm going to delete everything and just put a semicolon here. Now basically, kind of like how this function here, we told it, externally somewhere in this program, there is going to be a function or a variable called int number. Well, when you include this header file without the curly brackets, it's not a complete function. So you're basically just declaring it. So with that said, now it's saying that eventually there's going to be a function called calculate value within this class that will have two integers being passed to it that will return an int type. So now if we go back here and go to run it, you will see that it works. Even though the calculate value is below the main, it still is working because the header file says include me, so it includes the header file, and then it basically puts this line at the top of the main.cpp that says int calculate value, which is saying that there's going to be a function called calculate value that takes these two parameters. So for now, just any references to it, this is what it's going to look like, and then later on it'll find that calculate value and actually plug in these values. So it basically declares it and tells it that somewhere there's going to be a calculate value function, so not to worry about it when you're building the program, and then when it goes to run it, it'll actually try to find that calculate value. So if we took this out and tried to run it, you're going to see this really weird error down here, unresolved external symbol, and it says, a bunch of crap down here. Basically what you have to know is that you're telling it that there's going to be a calculate value, but when you run it, it can't find it. There's no calculate value there. So if you ever see that, that's pretty much what that means, is you're declaring something, you're telling it that there's supposed to be something called calculate value somewhere, but it's not able to find it. So that's our first function, and as you can see, it works extremely well. And if we wanted to clean this code up a little bit more, instead of declaring int return, setting it equal to this, you could technically bypass those two lines by putting the function right in the return statement. So it's going to say return this. And if we run it, then it's going to have the values just like that. So it's going to work the exact same. The reason I had it set up like this originally was because there might be times where you have other code in here. So you have int return, and you might say if int return is less than 0, so you're saying it's negative, then int return equals int return times -1. So let's say you only want to work with positive numbers. So now you can see everything's positive instead of a couple that were negative before. So I'll get into more of that stuff later on, but this tutorial is mostly about functions and how to pass values into it and how to pass values out of it. So it's relatively simple once you understand the basics of it, and it really comes in handy later on when you start doing more advanced stuff. So this is where I'm going to end this video here, and in the next video I'll get into a little bit more in-depth topics using some of these functions and passing parameters and different references and values and stuff like that. So it'll get a little more complicated, but it will help explain some of the inner workings of C++. But in order to get to that point, I needed to get you guys understanding what variables are and what functions are. And even though they both look like they're the same, you're saying that this is a container for an integer, you're saying that this is going to return an integer. So functions do something and then return a value, whereas this one is more of a container for it. So hope you guys understood. If you have any questions, make sure to put it in the comments below this video and let me know, and I will definitely try to answer them as best as I can. Thank you for watching, and make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you find these videos helpful, and I will see you guys in the next video.